She was sacrificed by 3 teen boys so that their band could make it big and even inspired the movie Jennifer's Body. Elise Pollard was born on April 26 of 1980 in Arroyo Grande, California. Her parents raised her as a Christian and had a strong connection with their beliefs. On July 22nd of 1995, 15-year-old Elise was reported missing. For about 8 months, no one could find a trace of Elise and her case went cold. The case opened up when 17-year-old Royce Casey admitted to taking the life of Elise with 2 other teenagers. He led police to mummified remains of Elise at a grave that was only a quarter-mile away from her home. The 2 other teens involved were 16-year-old Jacob and 15-year-old Joseph, and the 3 were all arrested and charged. According to Royce, they picked Elise because she was a blonde, blue-eyed virgin, and they were going to sacrifice her so that their metal band would make it big. Once the boys picked Elise as their victim, they stalked her for weeks and to find the best way they could get her away from school and to hang out with them alone. When they successfully lured Elise away from the school, they took her to a grove with the promise of substances. They attacked her from behind, put a belt around her neck, and strangled her. They all took turns stabbing her when she was left with 12 stab wounds. As these boys were attacking and kicking her body, Elise was praying to God for help and calling out for her mom. Elise eventually bled to death with her 12 stab wounds. But the torture didn't stop there. Once she had passed away, the boys essayed her body. Royce was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years, and it's probably because he confessed to the police. Jacob and Joseph were both sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. In 2021, Royce was up for parole, and he stated that he was a changed person. He felt remorse. He even got an education while he was in prison, but he was denied. Many think that the movie Jennifer's Body is based on this case. In the movie, Jennifer is taken to the woods by these band members. They end up sacrificing her so that their band can make it big. But in the movie, she becomes a vampire and takes the life of guys.
How this 15-year-old girl escaped a terrifying serial killer. 15-year-old Kara Robinson Chamberlain was in the front yard of her friend's home when a seemingly normal man got out of his car and approached her. That man was really 38-year-old serial killer Richard Avanis, who abducted 15-year-old Kara, put her in a storage bin that was in the backseat of his car, brought her to his home where he assaulted her for 18 hours. But Kara, at only 15 years old, started memorizing everything. From the serial number of the storage bin he transported her in, to the kind of cigarette he smoked, even the name of his dentist and doctor that Kara saw on papers that were just laying around the apartment. Once Richard fell asleep, Kara was able to get herself out of the handcuffs that he put her in, remove herself from the leg restraints that he also put her in, and tiptoe out of the front door. Once outside, she ran towards the nearest car, who took her to the police station. Through the many details that Kara remembered, they were able to find Richard's apartment again, but by the time they got there, Richard had already fled. Strangely enough, Richard went to his sister's house and just started confessing everything to her. Before abducting Kara, Richard had abducted, essayed, and unalived at least 3 other young girls, the youngest only 12 years old. Richard's also suspected to be guilty of even more young girls' deaths, but unfortunately we might never know if he is responsible because Richard unalived himself before the police were able to take him into custody. All of this happening while Richard's wife and mother were together at Disneyland. I love sharing these stories of survival. It reminds me a lot of Jimmy Close and JC Lee Dugard, which we also covered on this channel. It also reminds me a lot of Elizabeth Smart, which we haven't covered yet. So if you guys would be interested in seeing the case of Elizabeth Smart and how she saved herself from a really scary dude, let me know in the comments.
She lost her life from this poisonous birthday cake. On March 24th of 2024, it was 10-year-old Manvi's birthday in India. For her birthday celebration, her family ordered a cake online from a place called Cake Ganha. Around 7 p.m., Manvi was cutting the cake in front of her family, and this was all being recorded on video. All of the family members, including Manvi, consumed the cake, and about 3 hours later, they all got really sick. Manvi and her sister began vomiting, and she even complained of extreme thirst and dryness in her mouth, so she asked for water. After drinking her water, she went to sleep, but by the morning her health would deteriorate. Around 3 a.m. is when everything would go downhill for Manvi, and her family rushed her to the hospital. When she arrived to the hospital, doctors administered oxygen to her and an ECG was done, but soon after that she passed away. Her family claimed that there had to be a poisonous substance in the cake since they all got sick and filed a report against the owner of Cake Kanha. Back at home, Manvi's family still had the cake sitting there, so they took a sample of it so it could get tested, and once it came back, it revealed that her cause of death was suspected food poisoning. Ultimately, high levels of synthetic sweetener made the whole family sick from eating this cake and even resulted in death.
A serial killer so awful, they asked Ted Bundy for help capturing him. Gary Ridgway, or the Green River Killer, is thought to be the worst serial killer in American history. He preyed on vulnerable young women, targeting adult workers, but most of his victims were actually just teen runaways as young as 14 or 15 years old. Like his one victim, Deborah Esty, who ran away from home when she was 14 because she was being essayed by her own father. After she ran away, she was then attacked and essayed by a serial R-worder that was also on the loose at the time. She reported this attack to the police, who afterwards dropped her back off at the motel that she was staying at, and within minutes of them dropping her off, she was kidnapped by Gary, who essayed and unalived her. She was only 15 years old. I don't think I'll ever get her story out of my head. It's been reported that Gary has an extremely low IQ, but he's extremely calculated. Like, for instance, Gary would leave cigarette butts with other people's DNA on them around like his victims' bodies to throw off the police. And when Gary was eventually on the police's radar, he was able to pass multiple lie detector tests. Gary Ridgway was attacking and unaliving so many women that at some points they were finding 2 to 3 bodies a week. Gary Ridgway was eventually caught after being on the police's radar for over a decade. The DNA that eventually got Gary, the police had in their custody for over 14 years, but they just couldn't get a match on it because DNA testing just wasn't what it is now. Gary Ridgway did go on to confess to unaliving all 49 women and girls' bodies that they found, but claims there's at least 20 more out there that they just haven't found yet. I don't know if there's a case out there that scares me as much as Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. In the comments, let me know what case you'd want to see me cover next, especially if it's a case that really keeps you up at night.
Why is no one talking about the terrifying heist that just happened at Disney Springs? People are calling this masked man Finding Stilo or the Wet Bandit. He fully did a GTA heist in real life. It was the 15th of September at Disney Springs in Orlando when this whole mental scene unfolded. So Paddlefish is a restaurant that opened in 2017. It's basically like a seafood restaurant, and it's on a fake modern steamboat, which basically it's supposed to look like it's a boat floating on the water, but it's a restaurant. This is at the Disney Springs area, which is like a shopping / dining / entertainment area at Lake Buena Vista. It's obviously super popular with people who are at Disney in Orlando because it's just a short walk and you can grab some really nice food. So just after midnight on that Monday, a man dressed in full scuba gear and a wetsuit burst into the restaurant demanding that people get down and close their eyes. Luckily, there weren't actually any restaurant guests at the time. It was just some employees, but I've seen it reported that he even tied some of these employees up and they were fearing for their lives. It must have been so terrifying. Cameras captured this really disturbing image of him going up and presumably spraying the CCTV so that it was less likely he would get identified and caught. He then grabbed between $10,000 and $20,000, stashed it somewhere, and then probably the weirdest part of this case for me is that he then jumped from the restaurant into the water and appeared to swim away. I mean, thankfully no one was actually hurt. I can't imagine how distressing that must have been for the employees, but nobody was actually physically hurt, which I suppose is a blessing. One of the things that I was thinking though while I was researching this was like, why does a restaurant have $10,000 in cash just randomly there? Do you guys think that this feels like it's an inside job? Or what are your other theories? Because, I mean, obviously this guy has got to be certainly a professional swimmer, I would think.
This is the haunting last footage of 16-year-old Brianna Jai, who was brutally murdered by her friend for being transgender. This case begins in 2022 when 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson was transferred to Birchwood High School in Colchester, England, where she met and quickly became friends with Brianna. Brianna was transgender and was extremely proud of who she was, and she aspired to help others find themselves. It wasn't long before Scarlett became obsessed with with Brianna, and she would then spend months plotting her murder with her childhood best friend, 16-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe. The two exchanged dozens of text messages, most of which were transphobic and dehumanizing, and they put Brianna on a kill list, which also included 4 other local boys that they didn't like. They ultimately agreed that Brianna would be their first kill because they thought it would be easy and because she was transgender. Scarlett put together a handwritten letter on how, when, and where they would kill Brianna, and they even had a code word to signal the start of the attack. On the day of the murder, which was February 1st, 2023, Scarlett and Eddie were caught on CCTV footage meeting with Brianna at a bus stop. They then lured her into Linear Park in Warrington to a secluded area where they then stabbed her 28 times in the head, neck, and chest. They repeatedly stabbed her until they were interrupted by a couple in the park walking their dog. They then ran away and left Brianna to bleed out, and sadly, Brianna died from her injuries. It didn't take long for authorities to piece together a timeline, and just a day after the murder, both Scarlett and Eddie were arrested for the crime. They both blamed each other, but the murder weapon was discovered to be Eddie's hunting knife, which was found in his room covered in Brianna's DNA. Police also found Brianna's blood all over his shoes and coat. There was no forensic evidence linking Scarlett to the murder weapon, and at first she initially declined having anything to do with the murder, but she ultimately confessed to having repeatedly stabbed Brianna, finding it exciting. She told a psychiatrist that she killed her because she thought Brianna would stop being her friend, and that she murdered her so that she would always be with her. Scarlett admitted to being obsessed with Brianna and wanting to take parts of her body as a token, and she had recently told Eddie that she wanted to keep Brianna's pretty eyes. If that wasn't horrible enough, Scarlett even admitted after she was arrested that she had a deep desire to kill and that she wanted to kill again. She even wrote a new kill list after being detained. During the trial, it came to light that Scarlett had actually tried to poison Brianna a few weeks before the murder by giving her red ibuprofen tablets. After they were given to her, Brianna became really sick. Her mom thought she just had appendicitis and saw little red blobs in her vomit. She had no idea that the person who was supposed to be friends with Brianna had been trying and planning to kill her. During a psych eval, Scarlett was diagnosed with a severe form of conduct dissocial disorder, and one of the main features of that is having no empathy. Eddie was evaluated as well after his arrest, and he was actually diagnosed with autism. He then stopped talking to anyone other than his mother, and he was diagnosed with selective mutism. During the trial, it was discovered that Scarlett was obsessed with serial killers like Richard Ramirez, and she even downloaded a special browser on her phone to watch real murders. Both Scarlett and Eddie pleaded not guilty, but they were convicted of Brianna's murder in December of last year. They were both sentenced to life in prison, but Scarlett will be eligible for parole after 22 years, while Eddie will be eligible in 20. This is incredibly scary considering both have shown no remorse, and the fact that Scarlett literally said she wanted to kill again after being arrested. The murder of Brianna Jai was deemed exceptionally brutal, and according to the Crown Prosecution Service, it was one of the most disturbing cases that they've ever seen. Everyone should know Brianna's story. She didn't deserve this.
This brother and sister duo murdered 12 members of their family and they got away with it. I'm True Crime Caitlin and this is the Bailey family massacre. Susie Bailey was one of 13 children from her parents Charles and Ruby Bailey. The family lived in a small 7-bedroom home in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where they had recently moved because Charles got offered a better paying job. Of all of the children, it was Susie who was the quote-unquote problem child. She would often skive off of school and argue and defy her parents, and this came to a head in June 1969. Father Charles realised that his 15-year-old daughter Susie was dating 19-year-old Johnny Bumgarner, who just so happened to be her full-blood cousin. Charles was horrified and disgusted with this relationship, and he demanded Susie to break up with Johnny, but she didn't want to. She loved him and she wanted to be with him. She would even sneak out of the house to go and be with him. Eventually, realising that Susie wasn't going to listen to him and she was going to continue to go and see Johnny, Charles threatened her and told her if she didn't stop everything with Johnny, he was going to contact the police and get him arrested. Because despite them being cousins, why does a 19-year-old want to date a 15-year-old? This is when Susie turned to her 13-year-old brother Roger and asked for his help in a deadly plan. In the early hours of the 8th of June 1969, Susie woke up her brother Roger because it was time to carry out their plan. The siblings went out to Charles's truck where they siphoned some gasoline from it and proceeded to go in the house, quietly creeping from room to room, dousing the entire home in gasoline with their sleeping family inside. Once the house was covered from outside, one of the siblings lit a scrap bit of paper on fire, threw it through a window, and watched as their home became engulfed in flames within seconds. Susie and Roger would flee from the house, and Johnny eventually picked them up. By the time police arrived, the house was completely consumed by the flames. One of the officers would describe being able to hear these screams coming from inside and seeing the outline of a woman, and her entire body was on fire. At the side of the house, miraculously, there was a survivor. Grandfather Obie Bailey managed to climb out of the bathroom window, the only room in the house that hadn't been doused in gasoline, and collapsed into a chair. His survival and his lack of trying to go back into the house to save the rest of his family raised suspicion for the public and the police. During his interviews, the police caught Obie in some sort of lie, something about his financial situation, and they suspected that he had something to do with the fire. By now, the fire marshal had investigated and determined that this was no accidental fire. This was a deliberate arson. Roger Bailey was staying with one of his aunties when he overheard the adults talking about the fire, talking about Obie and his potential involvement, when Roger stood up and said something that shocked them. He said, quote, "I bet you $10,000 that Grandpop didn't start that fire." Roger would go on to detail his and Susie's entire evil plan. That Charles was going to report Johnny to the police to get him arrested because Susie didn't want to break up with him, and that Susie didn't want to break up with him because she loved him, and so the only resolution they could come up with was murdering their entire family in a house fire. They had to do this so that Susie could continue her relationship with Johnny. Roger would be taken to the police station and eventually the courthouse, where he gave another verbal confession along with a written confession. For some reason, it was an assistant fire marshal and not a proper detective or investigator who inserted himself into the investigation. The fire marshal told the family who were caring for Susie to restrict her of food, of water, and to restrict her of sleep, so that when he interviewed her, she might be more susceptible to answering his questions and confessing, and so that's what the family did. In the early hours of the 10th, so this is 2 days after the fire was started, Susie was awoken and taken to be interviewed. She was read her rights and then, just like Roger, fully confessed, and Susie and Roger's stories matched up perfectly. The siblings would be charged with the 12 murders of their family members. This included their parents, Charles and Ruby Bailey, and their siblings, Nancy, Teresa, Claudie, Mary, Timmy, Debbie, Frankie, Dale, Charles, and Ricky, who were aged between 17 years old and 6 months old. When the trial began 10 months later, the judge ended up throwing out the prosecution's critical evidence, which was the confessions. He believed that Susie and Roger, who both had low IQs, didn't really understand their rights. They didn't understand that they could have had a lawyer present, and they didn't understand the consequences of what giving a confession would be. And so because of this, because the judge threw out the confessions, the state had no case and had no other option than to let Susie and Roger walk free. They walked free after confessing to murdering 12 people. Both of the siblings would go on to be placed into foster care and have identity changes. It is rumoured that Susie did in fact end up marrying her cousin Johnny Bumgarner, getting exactly what she wanted. If you would like to hear this case in depth and in more detail, I have posted a podcast episode on this case in its entirety. You can stream it right now on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, all of those places. Just search for True Crime with Caitlin or hit the link in my bio where you'll be able to find it.
This is the story of the 19th century serial killer, Mary Ann Cotton, also known as the Black Widow. In 1852, 20-year-old Mary Ann married William Marbury. They moved to southwest England, where they had their daughter Margaret Jane in 1856. Mary and William then moved back to northeast England so he could be a fireman. They then had another daughter named Isabella in 1858. The first daughter, Margaret Jane, died in 1860. She turned right around and had another daughter in 1861 and named her the exact same thing, Margaret Jane. She then had a son named John in 1863 who died that next year of a fever. Then her husband William died in 1865 of an intestinal disorder. Mary Ann collected a half year's wage for her husband's William death and a fourth of a year's wage for her son John's death. Soon after her husband's death, Mary Ann moved to County Durham, where her 3-year-old daughter, the second Margaret Jane, died of a fever. Mary Ann ended up getting a job at the infirmary and sent her last daughter, Isabella, to live with her mother. She married a patient at the infirmary named George Ward in 1865. This is the same year her first husband, William, died. George died in 1866 from intestinal problems. She collected the insurance money and moved on to James Robinson. He hired her as a housekeeper. 1 month into her job, James' baby dies from a fever. He turned to Mary Ann for comfort, and she became pregnant. While pregnant, Mary Ann's mother became ill, but it wasn't nothing serious. Mary Ann insisted that she would come take care of her mother and her child, Isabella. Mary Ann's mother was recovering just fine until Mary Ann got there. She started having stomach pains and ended up dying from a fever in 1867. After her mother's death, Mary Ann took Isabella back to James' household, where she soon developed stomach pain and ended up passing, along with James' other 2 children. They all passed of a fever. You know what? I'm going to have to do a part 2 to this, because this, Mary Ann, this is a lot to unpack, Mary. I need a shot. I'm speechless. This is part 2 of the 19th century serial killer, Mary Ann Cotton, aka the Black Widow. Mary Ann received a life insurance payment of £5 for her daughter Isabella in May of 1987. James Robinson, her boyfriend at the time, married her August of that year. They had their first child, Margaret Isabella, that same year. I think it's funny that she's using the same name over and over with her children, only to kill them. They had their second child, George, in June of 1969. James had grew suspicious of Mary Ann because she insisted that he insured his life. He found out that she was in debt for more than £50 and she stole more than £60 from him that she was supposed to put in the bank. He found out that she was forcing the older kids to pawn valuables around the house. He threw her out and kept custody of George. James survived, y'all! Mary Ann was homeless and living on the street for a few months until a friend of hers introduced her to her brother, Frederick Cotton. The two married in 1870 and had their first son in 1871. They were only married a few months until Mary Ann got wind that her ex-lover, Joseph, only lives 30 miles away. So she persuaded Frederick to pack up and move the family closer to him. Frederick had no idea why she wanted to move. He just did it anyway. And once they were settled into their new home, he became ill with a fever and died that same year. Right after Frederick's death, Mary Ann and Joseph made it official, and soon after she had her 13th child. Frederick Jr., Mary Ann's stepson, passed in 1972. 1 month after that, her brand new newborn baby passed. And 4 months after that, Joseph, she got him. Thomas Riley, a co-worker of Mary Ann, grew suspicious of her when she made the comment, "He's in the way," speaking of her sickly stepson, Charles Cotton. She also added, "I won't be troubled long. He will go like all the rest of the Cottons." Ew, Mary! Charles died 5 days later, and when Thomas got wind of it, he went straight to the police, asking them to delay the death certificate and pleaded for them to investigate. When Charles first passed, Mary Ann went straight to the insurance office, but there was no money there. They said, we're not releasing nothing till they complete the investigation. Mary Ann killed 3 husbands, a lover, a friend, her mother, and 11 children with arson. She would put arson in their tea. She would put arson in their food. She would even put arson in the wallpapers of the house sometimes. There were only 2 surviving children, Margaret and her son George, by James Robinson. Mary Ann Cotton was hung on March 24th, 1873. Lord, Mary, I need a shot. Y'all take a shot with me after this.
This young girl was kidnapped, dismembered, and then left for dead. And once her attacker was released from prison, he went on to commit murder. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Mary Vincent and the murder of Roxanne Hayes. Before we get into the case, I just want to give you all a very quick heads up that I have just released a brand new episode on my true crime podcast, True Crime with Caitlin. So make sure to go and check it out on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or YouTube. Linktree in my bio. In 1978, Mary Vincent's parents were going through a very messy, rocky, turbulent divorce. Desperate to get away from the chaos, 15-year-old Mary decided to hitchhike over 450 miles to her granddad's house. After spending just a couple of days there, Mary came over incredibly homesick, and so she decided to turn around and hitchhike her way back home. Hitchhiking is something that now we would never consider doing, but back in the 1970s it was considered very normal and even very safe. On the 29th of September 1978, Mary is stood on the side of a motorway with her thumb held out when a van pulls over, the man inside offering her a lift. She gratefully climbed into the van and the man inside introduced himself as Lawrence Larry Singleton. He was a man in his 50s. The two got to talking. Mary would say that Larry reminded her of her grandfather, and the familiarity made her feel a little bit more at ease. It relaxed her a little bit. After already having such a long day, Mary was absolutely knackered, and so she lay her head on her shoulder and fell asleep for a bit. When she later awoke, she didn't recognise where she was, but she knew that they weren't going the right way. When she confronted Larry with this, he brushed it off, saying that he had to come this way because he needed to find somewhere so that he could go to the toilet. Using this excuse, Larry drove them both down a dark, desolate, foresty road. When Larry pulled over and got himself out of the van, Mary also jumped out of the van. She leaned over and began to tie her shoes. She just had that feeling in her stomach that something wasn't right, something was off about this man, and she thought that maybe she had to make a run for it. But as she is leaned over tying up her shoelaces, out of nowhere she would be punched in the back of the head with so much force that it knocked her unconscious. When Mary regained consciousness, she horrifyingly realised that she had been stripped naked and she was restrained. Her arms were tied behind her back and her legs to the floor of the van. Desperate, Mary tried her very best to wriggle out of the restraints, but she couldn't. They were tied too tightly. Over the next several hours, Larry would repeatedly R-word, SA and sodomise 15-year-old Mary, all while she was crying, screaming in pain, in horror, begging him to stop and begging him to let her go. It wouldn't be until after Larry decided to stop to take a quick nap that he listened to Mary, or seemed to. He cut the restraints off her wrists and off her ankles and dragged her out of the van and onto the ground. Exhausted and terrified, Mary whimpered to Larry, begging for mercy, begging him to let her go, to which Larry coldly responded, quote, "Oh, you want to be set free? I'll set you free." With a firm grip on her left hand, within a split second, Larry extended a hand and with an axe in his other hand, he swung down on Mary's arm, hacking it off. When Mary dropped to the ground, Larry would proceed to strike Mary's right arm with the axe 4 times before fully dismembering it. Losing a large amount of blood and in shock, Mary would go limp. Believing that she was either dead or very close to death, Larry would pick up her body and threw her off the side of a culvert where she fell 30 feet to the ground, where she crashed to the floor, breaking 4 of her ribs. He would then mutter to her, quote, "Now you're free." Unbeknownst to Larry, Mary was clinging on to her life. She was aware and awake through the entire thing, but she had to play dead. She knew that if Larry knew that she was alive, he was never going to keep her alive. He would kill her, and so Mary used all of her strength to silence herself. Terrified that this was some sort of trap and that Larry was potentially standing at the top of the culvert awaiting her, Mary lay at the bottom where she landed in a contorted position for hours. When her eyes began to flutter closed and she began to feel sleepy, Mary knew that she had to take action, because if she fell asleep, she wouldn't wake up, and she had to survive. She had to get this man caught. He had to be put in prison. He couldn't go and do this to another innocent young girl. Mary pulled herself up from the floor, and to prevent more blood loss from the nubs in her arms, she packed the nubs full of mud and dirt and held her arms in an upright position. She crawled back up the 30-feet bank and ran for 3 miles before finally reaching a road and finding someone who was able to help her. It would be a young couple that discovered Mary, and they took her into their car and whizzed her to the hospital, where she would stay for over a month. Here, she was able to detail everything to the police: Larry, his description, and a description of his van. Using this information, the police created a photo fit which was broadcasted all over the country. And miraculously, it reached one of Larry's neighbours, who recognised the photo fit, recognised that that was a picture of Larry, and reported this to the police, essentially handing him in. When they eventually searched his home, they would discover some trophies that he had kept for his crime. This included some cigarettes that he had stolen from Mary, and Mary's clothes which he had taken off her. He had burnt them. At his trial, Lawrence Singleton would be handed the maximum sentence that the judge was able to give him, and that was 14 years. 14 years for kidnapping and dismembering and traumatizing a 15-year-old girl. During the trial, the judge even said to Larry that if he could give him more, he would, but the law prevented him from doing so. As Mary left the courtroom on the final day, Larry would turn to her and pointedly and terrifyingly said, quote, "I will finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life." Shockingly, he wouldn't even serve the entire 14-year sentence. He was actually released after serving only 8 years due to good behaviour. After being released, Larry moved to Florida, which is where he grew up, where he originally came from. On the 19th of February 1997, a man who was working as a house painter on a house a couple of doors down from Larry would peer into his window and witness something horrifying. He saw Larry, who was now in his 70s, stark naked, covered, dripping in blood, ferociously stabbing into a now limp woman's body. This woman was 31-year-old Roxanne Hayes. Roxanne was a loving, devoted mother to her children. Unfortunately, she struggled with addiction, and she would use sex work to help fuel her addiction, but also to help care for her kids, so that they never went without and that they never had to go hungry. Roxanne would sustain at least 7 stab wounds from Larry, and on Larry's body, there was long, deep scratches discovered, which showed that Roxanne had tried to fight for her life. Unlike at Mary's trial, where Larry showed absolutely no remorse and even continued to threaten Mary, at the trial for Roxanne's murder, Larry allegedly seemed remorseful for what he'd done, and he even offered up a reason, an excuse for him committing the murder. He said that he had hired Roxanne as a sex worker for her services. He agreed with her fee of $20. However, he allegedly discovered Roxanne rifling through his wallet and stealing more money from him. When he realised this, he saw red and in a fit of rage stabbed her to death. Lawrence Singleton would be found guilty of the first-degree murder of Roxanne Hayes, and for this, he was handed the death penalty. He would die in 2011 before his execution, dying of cancer.
Was beat with a rock that literally disfigured her skull, and then her killer left her exposed and discarded her like trash. Aiken Riley is on a morning run in a public park in Athens, Georgia, when a man grabs her, drags her into the wood, and this girl is fighting for her life for 17 minutes straight. Aiken is kicking, screaming, hitting, scratching him when he grabs a rock and starts banging her head to the point where her skull completely disfigures. It's been 3 hours and Laken never went home. Her mom is worried sick. She's not answering her calls or her texts. Her roommates start freaking out, so they follow her Find My iPhone location off the trail that she was on, and that's when they found her AirPod to the side of the trail. Her roommates call 911, and the police later found Laken's body with visible signs of injuries, tangled hair and obvious signs of the violent struggle that she went through deep inside the woods off the trail that she was running. Before Lakin went on her run at 9 a.m., a student who lives at University of Georgia called 911 at 8 a.m. because a man wearing all black was acting very suspicious, and he even attempted to open the door of a woman's apartment while peeking into her window. Only 1 hour later, he found his victim and took the life of Lakin Riley. Because Lakin was wearing a Garmin watch and she always keeps her phone with her while going on her runs, every detail of her attack was recorded. At 9:03 a.m., Lakin had left her house to start her morning run on the trail that she typically always goes on. But at 9:10 a.m., her running came to a stop, and at the same time, her SOS function on her iPhone activated. Her 911 was called, but before she could even speak, the call got disconnected. You can literally hear a male voice in the phone call, muffled noises, and thuds at the end of the video.
Clark County 911. Clark County 911.
At 9:14 a.m., her watch recorded some odd movements and tracked her body being dragged more than 65 feet into the woods. For 17 minutes, her heart rate reached over 180 beats per minute before dropping to zero at 9:28, the time of her death. Cops found chunks of skin inside of Lakin Riley's fingertips. A bloody jacket was also found nearby inside of a dumpster, and a 911 call earlier that morning of a suspicious man, all linked Jose Antonio Ibarra as the man who abducted, assaulted, and killed 22-year-old Lakin Riley. When Jose was caught by the police, they looked at his arms, and all they saw was a whole bunch of scratch marks and chunks of skin missing. He was arrested, and it turns out that Jose came into America illegally. His trial just ended, and he was found guilty of all counts of the murder of Lakin Riley, a university student working towards becoming a nurse to help others and save lives. Jose actually waived his right to a jury trial. I'm not sure why, but that literally means that the judge decided his fate. He now faces his life in prison without the possibility of parole. May Lakin Riley rest in eternal peace, and my deepest condolences for her family. It broke my heart seeing their reactions on that police cam footage. Nobody should ever receive news like that. Please be safe out there. You truly never know who is lurking in these creepy woods.
Ladies and gentlemen, there was a cover-up in this case, plain and simple. It's not that it could happen, it's that every single one of those things that I just mentioned did happen right in front of you. When you stare at the truth down, you'll see that the Commonwealth has not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. Not even close. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Reed is innocent. Do justice and find her not guilty. Karen Reed is accused of ending the life of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, a Boston police officer, after his body was found lying deceased in the snow on the front lawn of a fellow Boston police officer. This trial has captivated me in a way that not many trials have, because there's a truth about this case. There is a truth. It just depends on who you ask. The first trial left the jury incapable of making a unanimous decision. It was declared a mistrial. The second trial is set to start this month. January 28th of 2022 was a Friday. By then, 41-year-old Karen Reed and her boyfriend, 46-year-old John O'Keefe, had been together for 2 years. That day, they had an argument. They argued about John's niece and nephew, who were practically his children, given that he had taken them in to live with him and treated them as his own after his sister and his brother-in-law passed away, which shows a lot about the kind of person that John O'Keefe was. Regardless, by the time nighttime rolled around, the two of them were fine. They seemingly got over whatever they were arguing about and met up around 9 p.m. to have a fun night at a place called CF McCarthy's. They spent a couple hours there and around 11 p.m. headed over to a place called Waterfall Bar and Grill. At Waterfall, they met up with a group of John's friends who, like John, worked in law enforcement. A lot of fellow police officers. They spent some time there. Now it's past midnight, the place is closing, but the group isn't ready to call it a night. Brian Albert, a fellow Boston police officer, and his wife Nicole extend an open invite to go back to their house at 34 Fairview Road. Part of the people invited include Jennifer McCabe and her husband. Jennifer, who is sisters with the owner of the house, Nicole Albert, and Jennifer, who is friends with John O'Keefe. Karen leaves Waterfall in her black SUV, John O'Keefe in the passenger seat. The black SUV is seen outside of 34 Fairview Road, but Karen and John aren't coming inside. So Jen texts John at 12:37 a.m. saying, "Here." She then calls him. They speak for 8 seconds. Jen texts John again, "Hello," at 12:31. 9 minutes later, she texts him again saying, "Pull up behind me." 2 minutes later, she texts him again, "Where are you?" and calls him again twice. At 12:43, she calls him again. 5 minutes later, calls him again. At 12:50, so now it's been 23 minutes since the first initial text, Jen calls John again. Call goes unanswered. If you ask Karen Reed, her final story is, and I say final story because it seems like even she was unsure of it at first, presumably because it was a long night where a lot of beverages were consumed. But if you ask her, she would tell you that she was unaware if they were invited to the after party, let's call it. So when they pulled up, she asked John to go inside to make sure that they were welcome. He got out of the car, did not come back to get her, didn't answer her calls, so she got angry and left, drove to John's house alone, and fell asleep on the couch. If you ask everyone else inside that house, they would say that after leaving Waterfall Bar and Grill, they never saw John O'Keefe. Every single one of them would bet their life on it that John never entered Brian and Nicole Albert's house. Regardless, Karen wakes up in a panic back at John's house around 4:30 in the morning. From the moment she opened her eyes, she knew that something was wrong because John wasn't there. John never made it home. Where's John? Where's John? He's not home. Is he okay? What happened? Where is he? She's freaking out. She wakes up. John sneezes to get Jen McCabe's phone number, calls Jen at 4:53 a.m. saying she's going crazy because she can't find John, calls another one of John's friends, Carrie Roberts, tells her that she's worried about John because he never came home, and according to Carrie on that phone call, Karen said something about being worried that John is gone as in no longer alive, and mentioned something about the possibility of him being hit with a snow plow. The three women end up in one car driving to Brian and Nicole Albert's house to go look for John. Karen is still full panic mode, rambling about worst case scenarios, and according to Jen and Carrie, she asks them, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? As they're pulling up to the house, mind you, this is all happening in the middle of a blizzard, and I mean blizzard like it was a historic snow blizzard in Boston. There was so much snow. But they're pulling in and Karen goes hysterical, saying, there he is, John is right there. Carrie and Jen see nothing. The snow is so bad they can hardly see as it is, but Karen practically jumps out of the car, runs straight to John's body that is covered in a layer of snow, starts trying to warm him up with her body heat, apparently yells at Jen, and tells her to look up something along the lines of how long can somebody last in the cold before they pass away, or how long to pass away from hypothermia. While Karen and Carrie are all hands on deck trying to help John, Jen calls 911 and reports that they need assistance immediately at 34 Fairview Road because there's a man lying in the snow unresponsive with what appears to be blood on his face. Carrie later says that when they first found John, he looked pretty bad. He had 2 black eyes. Jen, on the phone with the operator, tells him that she thinks it's too late. She thinks that he has already passed away. Paramedics arrive at the scene. Everyone is hysterical. One of the emergency responders, as well as other people present, would later say in court that while hysterical and inconsolable at the scene of the crime, Karen Reed was repeatedly saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Paramedics rush John to the hospital, but heartbreakingly, despite their best efforts, they are not able to save him, and he is pronounced deceased by 7:50 in the morning on January 29th of 2022. Now let's clarify what happened in the time between when Karen's SUV was seen outside of 34 Fairview Road the night prior to when John O'Keefe's body was found the next morning. How and when he ended up in a pile of snow on that front yard, well, it depends on who you ask. Regardless, someone has lost their life, a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department, 46-year-old John O'Keefe, and the investigation began. State Trooper Michael Proctor was assigned the case. He finds Karen Reed to speak to her, and her black SUV is taken in to be processed as evidence. When Karen speaks to Michael Proctor, he tells her what I just told you. Her version of events was that her and John argued that day, but they were fine by nighttime, went out, she drove them to the Alberts house, John got out of the car, never came back, so she made a 3-point turn and left to go back to John's house where she fell asleep. She says when she woke up, she noticed her taillight on her car was broken, but claimed she was unsure of how or when it happened. Michael Proctor and other officers and investigators on his team, they start hearing about Karen Reed's comments that she made, wondering if she could have hit John with her vehicle. He hears that according to the people inside the house, John never made it inside the Alberts house, and he hears that Karen said to a paramedic, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Then he gets the autopsy results back of how John's body was found, injured with cuts on his face, a laceration on the back of his head, 2 black eyes, multiple skull fractures, missing one of his shoes with a broken glass shattered by him that he had a drink in. His cause of death ruled as blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia. So Michael Proctor decides in that moment that the only explanation that makes sense here is that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car. He fell back, maybe hit his head, and was unable to get back up, and Karen Reed left him there in the snow all alone for him to pass away. And with that suspicion, Karen Reed is arrested on February 1st on charges of leaving the scene of a crime, manslaughter, and motor vehicular homicide. Her charges would later be upgraded to second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under and leaving leaving the scene of personal injury or death. She would plead not guilty to all charges and post bail. So that is the case that prosecutors were going to try and make with pretty much all of Boston PD on their side. But then Karen Read starts connecting the dots. She starts to figure out all of the connections everybody has of the people who will be testifying against her and of the people who were there the night of January 28th. She starts thinking about how Jen McCabe is sisters with Nicole Albert, who is married to Brian Albert, who is friends with Brian Higgins, who we'll talk about later, who all seem to be very friendly or at the very least run in the same circle as Michael Proctor, lead investigator. And Karen starts thinking that something happened inside that house and that this whole thing is a cover-up of all these people intertwined with each other and working together to try and frame the death of John O'Keefe on her. Ugh, just looking at this evidence, there's so much to go through. I'm thinking I should have just waited to make this a Wait, I'm not supposed to say that yet. I'm thinking that this story deserves an hour-long video, but we will just go through some of the important parts that stood out to me. We're in the courtroom now, okay? The 6-week trial that turned into something way bigger than anyone could have seen coming. Hi, jump scare, it's me in the future. I'm editing this video as we speak, and I'm deciding that I'm going to turn it into 2 parts because the video is way too long. Do not be alarmed. Part 2 is up now, and I'm sorry I had to do that, but it was literally, I filmed for 40 minutes. Okay, proceed. Love you, bye. We're in the courtroom now, okay? The 6-week trial that turned into something way bigger than anyone could have seen coming. Hi, this is future me editing this video. I had to cut the video into 2 parts because the first video was just too long, so this is part 2. If you haven't watched part 1, go watch it now. Okay, proceed. Love you, bye. And again, I sound like a broken record, but the prosecution is fighting to prove that Karen Read was and is the only person responsible for ending John's life. And Karen Read's team is fighting to prove that she is being framed. One of the biggest things the prosecution held on to was Karen Read telling multiple people in regards to John, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. They are saying that she basically confessed. I mean, call it what it is. If they're saying that she said those words, they are saying that she flat out confessed. However, nobody, not the paramedics on the scene, no witnesses, not the police, not a single person wrote or stated that Karen Read said that in their reports from that night. And they're holding on to it so hard as if that was arguably one of the most important parts of this case, yet every single person just failed to write that in their reports. Karen says that she may have said something along those lines, but more so phrased in a could I have hit him, more so as a question. Next, the infamous broken taillight on Karen Read's black SUV. Karen is unsure of how she broke her taillight. But of course, the prosecution says it's obvious. She hit John with her car as she was turning around, as the evidence showed her car reversing at 24 miles an hour. They say she must have hit him then when she turned around and left the Alberts house around 12:45 in the morning. Because pieces of Karen's broken taillight were found in the snow at the scene of the crime, that is a fact. And John's DNA was found on the taillight pieces, and the prosecution uses the angry voicemail that Karen left John that night after she drove off to prove that their relationship was a bad one, a toxic one, and hints at the fact that Karen was angry with John that night as what they say was her motive for ending his life. And the voicemails are nasty. When Karen drove off, she left John voicemails yelling at him, calling him a loser, telling him to go f*** himself, telling her that she him, etc., etc. Fine, they have a strong argument with those voicemails proving how angry she was at John that night. But the defense also has a big argument. They believe that that evidence, the pieces of the broken taillight, were planted. And they have a few things that could back that up and make Michael Proctor look suspicious, or at the very least show horrible police work. First of all, there's video footage of Karen leaving John's house at 5:07 in the morning when she was going to go meet Jen and Carrie to go look for John. And it looks like she could have bumped John's car with her car on the side of the broken taillight, so she could have broken her taillight then, which they could use to try and make their case, but for some reason, all and any footage that would have captured Karen's black SUV on the side of the broken taillight, any cameras with footage that could prove that her taillight was not broken when she left John and got back to his house alone, all that footage is missing, including camera footage from a public library. The footage is just missing, gone, can't be found. Why? I wonder the same thing. Then, when the crime scene was being processed after John's body was found, those pieces of taillight in the snow are not found for hours. Nothing is found for hours, even though they were literally searching with a leaf blower, blowing the snow out of the way. And then suddenly, after Karen's car was taken in as evidence, over 40 pieces of broken taillight are found. The defense is saying, look, Michael Proctor needed to wait to get his hands on Karen's car car so he could grab pieces from her taillight, and in a small gap of time when the crime scene was left unattended, he could have someone drop them off and plant them as evidence. Prosecution says that's stupid. Of course we didn't do that. Here is a video showing when we were processing Karen's SUV, nobody even touched that side of the car. They're playing the video in court. The defense says, hold on, that is backwards. That video is literally inverted, so when you turn it back around, there is someone touching the area of the broken taillight, and the hat of the person that seems to be back there doing whatever is none other than Michael Proctor's hat. And on the topic of bad police work in this investigation, when collecting evidence at the scene of the crime, they didn't have evidence bags, I guess, or whatever they needed to collect evidence properly. So you know what they used to collect blood? Blood they found as evidence. They collected the blood and put it in red Solo cups. They put those red Solo cups in a brown grocery bag. Shocking. Moving on, back to the prosecution saying Karen and John's relationship was rocky and not good. Turns out 30 messages come out between Karen Reed and Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins, who I briefly mentioned before, is a federal agent who was at the Alberts house the night of the crime. To make a long story short, Brian Higgins and Karen Reed, while she was in a relationship with John, were messaging each other, being very flirty, and they even shared a kiss not too long ago. The prosecution says John and Karen's relationship was bad, not good. She was interested in someone else. She does not care about John O'Keefe. The defense says, not so fast. How about we consider the possibility that John O'Keefe found out that his girlfriend Karen Reed was flirting with Brian Higgins, and that night he entered the Alberts house where Brian Higgins was, went up to him to confront him. A fight broke out, someone took it too far, knocked John out, and when he became unresponsive, everyone inside that house decided to put him out on the front yard, let him pass away from hypothermia, and frame it all on Karen. Now, more evidence to support the idea the defense presented or a similar situation of a fight breaking out. Brian and Nicole, the owners of 34 Fairview Road, had a German Shepherd, a dog named Chloe. Soon after John's death, the family got rid of the dog. Chloe the dog, it ran away, they gave her away, I don't know. But Chloe the dog had a history of being aggressive and violent. The defense has an expert witness testify and say John's injuries on his arms are likely to be teeth or claw marks, showing that John had likely been attacked by an animal, aka a large dog. Even though the prosecution had their own expert witness come up and say that those injuries could be scratches from the broken taillight, a lot of people believe the injuries do look way more like scratches or teeth marks from a dog. The prosecution says, well, they tested the injuries on John for dog DNA and there was none found, so he was not attacked by a dog. And the defense says, well, no, they didn't find dog DNA, but they did find pig DNA, which could be from a dog treat, which could have been left on John from Chloe the dog's teeth. The Alberts also sold their house after the crime, and they said that they had been planning on selling it for a while, even before John's passing. Regardless, you could look at that as being suspicious, so the defense uses that to support their argument that something happened inside that house. A strong belief by a lot of people is that there was a fight that broke out in the house between John O'Keefe, maybe Brian Higgins, or somebody else. They were fighting, the dog saw it, got aggressive, jumped on John, and attacked him further. They left him out in the cold to pass away, and then the Alberts got rid of the dog, rid of the house, no dog, no house, no evidence. The prosecution says, look, this guy, John O'Keefe, he was one of us, a Boston cop in a house full of Boston cops. How dumb do you think we would be to put a deceased body out in our front yard, knowing that we would be responsible for the death and tangled in the case? Which is also a good point. However, let's get into the 1.5 million accidental butt dials that happened that night. Well, we'll just mention some of them. Okay, so back to the night of the crime. By 2 a.m., everyone had left the Alberts house. Everyone went to bed, or so we thought. Brian Higgins didn't go home to bed. He went to the Canton Police Department, which is the police department handling this case. He went there around 1:30 a.m. He had no business being there after a long night out, but he went to apparently fill out some paperwork quickly or do something random, and then apparently he went home to bed. So by 2 a.m., everyone claimed to be asleep. But phone records show that at 2:22 a.m. on January 29th, Brian Albert called Brian Higgins. Seconds later, Brian Higgins calls Brian Albert back, and that call is answered. It only lasts a few seconds, but it is answered. Both men under oath say, I don't know, wasn't me, I was sleeping. Then we find out that Brian Albert destroys his phone, gets rid of his phone a day before he received a protective order to hand in his phone. Then months later, Brian Higgins drives to a military base, I'm pretty sure hours away, completely destroys his phone and his SIM card, disposes of the pieces of them in separate areas in the military base that investigators do not have access to. And the defense says, look, they obviously have something to hide. Shall I mention other weird phone activity? Jen McCabe, at 2:25 a.m., she sends 2 texts text messages. What they were, we don't know. She also deletes a bunch of calls that she made the night of the crime. Weird as well. That leads us to another battle of the experts, the infamous how long to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m. again when everyone is suspected to be asleep. During this time, according to the prosecution's argument, John's body is already outside in the snow all alone, but nobody knows yet. Only Karen. Everyone else is asleep. Jen's phone records show that at 2:27 a.m. she made a Google search, how long to die in the cold. How would she know to search that if she isn't supposed to know that her friend is out in the snow yet she doesn't find out for hours? Well, the defense says that search was made at 2:27 a.m. and then it was deleted. It's literally in black and white. It's right there. There's no question about it. Jen on the stand says, no, wasn't me. I didn't make that search. Which, I mean, she looks pretty silly saying that when the phone records literally show that it was. But the prosecution comes with a different expert saying, well, it might be wrong because it says 2:27 a.m., but that isn't when the search was made. The search was made when they found John with Karen and Carrie, and Karen was yelling at Jen to look up how long it takes for someone to pass away in the cold or pass away from hypothermia, whatever. That's why she made that search in the morning, which she did, and other records show that at that time in the morning, she did do that. She did search that when John's body was found. What the prosecution experts say that it shows 2:27 a.m. because that's the time that Jen opened the tab, not the time she made the search, but the time that she opened the tab. So maybe both are right. They're just seeing it differently. I don't know. Battle of the experts. One more thing I want to mention, Lucky, the snowplow driver. Lucky lived in the area for a long time. He knows the Alberts household. He's known they lived there for a long time. Lucky was on shift that night. He drove with his snowplow right by the Alberts house between 2:30 and 2:45 in the morning. Lucky testified that the seat on his snowplow is higher than most, so he can see 5 to 15 feet out in front of him, and he testified with 100% certainty that when he drove past the Alberts house that night, there was nobody on the front lawn. Lucky says, no way, there was nothing. I saw it. I didn't see John. He wasn't out there. The defense makes a point to say, well, if the prosecution is correct and Karen hit John with her car and left him there at 12:45 a.m., wouldn't Lucky have seen him? And the prosecution says, no, Lucky must have missed him. Okay, and there's literally so much more, but that's what I felt was important to know. Well, after the 6 weeks of this trial that was keeping everyone on the edge of their seat, the trial was declared a mistrial. And the jury was able to find Karen Reed not guilty on 2 out of the 3 charges, but because they couldn't agree unanimously on all 3 charges, the judge declared a mistrial, meaning all of this has to happen again. This whole trial will happen again, and John's poor family will have to sit through an entire second trial. His mom. I cannot believe that this was the ending that everyone was waiting for. The second trial is currently happening. It started with jury selection underway. I have no idea what we can expect from the second trial, but let me know your thoughts. Also wanted to mention there's a great documentary out. I watched it on HBO, but I think it's other places as well. It's called A Body in the Snow, Karen Reed's Trial. You should see it. Does a great job of explaining all the evidence and goes more into detail. I also was briefly listening to the Crime Junkies episode they just put out on this case, which great watch again. They go really into detail about all the evidence, etc. So a good source to get information about this case as well. But don't know how long this video is going to be. I feel like I've been recording for like 2 hours. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Please let me know your thoughts on this. And also remember that somebody lost their lives. He is a family. He was a son, a brother, a very loved guy, and he will be very missed. So be respectful in the comments. Remember that this is a real case. These are real people. And yeah, I love you guys very, very much. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy. And I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Mwah.